Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Walk the ball. Chris Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads Live, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined tonight by Matthew Moreno, Blake Williams. Guys, the Dodgers 14.5 game lead in the division. All is well in Los Angeles, right, Matt?
Yeah, if that's one way to phrase it and frame it. And I think also, I want to Orlando. I see him commenting Chris Taylor is his favorite part of our intro video. So that's something I think you and Orlando share in common.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. I just feel bad for our guy, current Dodger Alex Reyes, who he's hitting the home run off of in the intro video. Blake, 4-3 week for the Dodgers, just keeping the hot streak rolling. Nothing much to talk about tonight, right?
Yeah, I don't think anything important happened that we need to address in this, especially not against who they played. It was just the last week, I think they had 7 off days or something, but yeah, we're here now, so.
Yeah. Somebody said Blake's got his CSUN bucket hat. This was a giveaway at the Dodgers game. There's debate about whether he's going to have the LA or the CSUN facing forward. He goes with CSUN. So we appreciate everybody who's joining us live on YouTube, live on Facebook. We appreciate everybody also who is joining after the fact via podcast, Apple, Spotify, and Google. You can find the DodgerHeads podcast or on YouTube. Matt's going to be with us for a little bit as we tackle the biggest topic of the night, which is the Braves and everything that took place over the last 4 nights for the Dodgers. And then Blake and I are going to bat around a bunch of pitching notes on Bobby Miller, Julio Urias, Lance Lynn, Walker Buehler, Emmett Sheehan, Ryan Pepio, the bullpen, get to a ton of injury updates on JD Martinez and Joe Kelly, among others. So lots and lots to get to. But obviously, guys, I'm joking when I say nothing much happened because the Dodgers played the Braves in what I said was probably the biggest regular season series of the season across Major League Baseball. You've got the 2 best teams in the National League with the number 1 seed seemingly hanging in the balance. The Braves had a 4-game lead entering the weekend. Not only that, you've got a neck-and-neck MVP race with 2 of the best players in baseball against each other. And then Thursday night happens, and it's the most incredible baseball game that I've seen in a while. Teams going back and forth. Acuna hits a grand slam. Mookie Betts hits 2 home runs. The Dodgers almost erase a 6-run lead. It ends up being a great night. But from there, and including that game, I guess you could say it was kind of a mess for the Dodgers. They end up losing 3 out of 4 to the Braves. The number 1 seed is basically out of reach at this point. And so the question I want to start with, and Matt, I'll come to you, is have you been surprised by the reaction to the Braves series? I would say it has been overwhelmingly negative, and maybe that piece isn't surprising. The Dodgers lost 3 out of 4, but are you surprised at maybe how nervous, anxious, down on the Dodgers so many people seem to be after what we just watched?
No, I'm not too surprised. I think it was kind of a microcosm, honestly, of sort of the season. As much as the Dodgers went on a tear in August, I think there was still some segment of fans that was maybe questioning how real is this and maybe still concerned. And I think some of that is justified. And obviously, if you expand, look at, the entire season, we've discussed the slow start that kind of got off to, all the different injuries that have mounted. And, now like Blake Treinen, who's somebody that the Dodgers were counting on, probably not coming back now. Daniel Hudson, somebody who the Dodgers are counting on, probably not coming back. So it doesn't surprise me too much. And I think also the fact that this series was played so late in the season added to kind of some of the frustration and maybe concern that is, maybe it's a little bit more heightened than it would have been had they played right after the All-Star break or something like that. And I think then you also have to kind of layer in how the games went. And I know, the series opener, the Dodgers did battle their way back, and that was great to see that they didn't just lay down. That's a characteristic that this team hasn't shown. They won't quit, and that's certainly a positive. But on the other hand, Lance Lynn, who's, somebody who the Dodgers likely are counting on to start postseason games, had, got knocked around a little bit. And so I think the way it sort of happened too didn't help.
Blake, what about you? I mean, it seems like, according to my mentions, a lot of people decided after this weekend that the Dodgers are no longer World Series contenders, that the National League is all but wrapped up for the Atlanta Braves. Are you surprised that that reaction has come after a 4-game set that began in the month of August?
I'm not surprised, but I think the Braves made it pretty clear they're a tier ahead of the Dodgers. And that's not to say the Dodgers are a bad team. The Braves are just that good. They lead baseball in run differential by a lot. Dave Roberts said they arguably have the best starting pitching. If you look at their hard hit balls this year, they have like 100 more at 110 miles per hour than the next closest team or something crazy like that. It feels like the Dodgers are chasing them in pretty much every category, but maybe the bullpen. But luckily for the Dodgers, the playoffs are very random and they still have a chance to win the World Series because you just have to get in. We've seen so many times that a team can just dominate in the regular season and then not perform in the postseason, as we don't want to remember about last year, or just they dominated the Padres all year and then the Padres beat them in the postseason. Or in 2017, the Diamondbacks beat them all year and then the Dodgers swept them in the postseason. So there's just so much randomness in baseball that I wouldn't say it rules out them winning the World Series. And I don't think people should react that way or say that they have no chance of catching the Braves, but the Braves made it pretty clear they're the class of the NL.
Well, and that was kind of, I want to push, like sort of press into that a little bit, is the second question I wanted to ask is, did your view of the Dodgers or the Braves change? And when I hear you say, hey, the Braves made it clear that they're a tier above the Dodgers, did that view solidify or change, or would you have told me the exact same thing on Thursday morning prior to this series beginning, Blake?
I think I would have said the same thing, but also I started to buy into the gritty Dodgers a bit, and I would have liked to see them play a more competitive series, but the Dodgers were just outmatched in every phase, so it's hard to say, looking back in hindsight, what I would have said then with how I was feeling about them versus how I'm feeling now, but it was definitely a disappointing series, and I think there is some reason for concern after it, but also it's a series at the start of September, and there's a lot of time left and a lot of randomness and still baseball to be played. Like the games aren't won on paper, and a World Series isn't won in August.
Yeah. Matt, what about you? I mean, we sat here a week ago and we're riding about as high as we possibly could have been riding. Then the Dodgers go and sweep the Diamondbacks. Mookie Betts MVP stuff is at a fever pitch. The Dodgers have one of the best months in franchise history. And then they play 4 games against the Braves, and it feels like everybody thinks this team sucks all of a sudden. Like, for you personally, did your view of the Dodgers or the Braves change over the last few days? Because I'm going to get to my thoughts on Blake saying that these games weren't competitive in just a second, but I want to give you a chance to answer this question first.
I think the biggest change for me came in my perception of the Braves. And admittedly, I haven't had a chance to watch them a whole lot this season. Obviously, you kind of see highlights and read about things that are going on in this and that. So I knew like that they were having a great year, obviously. Yeah. Their lineup is better than I thought it was. And again, that's just my personal, view. And, in terms of the like, I sort of agree with Blake, like, and I've expressed it on this show, like the Dodgers, for them to win a World Series, I know that's not necessarily what we're talking about right now. Like a lot of things need to go right for the Dodgers for them to compete, to really, they're capable of beating, the top teams in baseball. And really, if you spell it all out on paper, there's probably, excuse me, maybe 2 or 3 teams that I think you could say are legitimately better than them. So it's not like they're, I'm not considering them a middle of the pack team by any means, but I think, like I said, the Braves to me are, on one hand, their lineup, at least their bullpen, which we kind of heard a lot about, and their pitching and just everything sort of break. Like they let the Dodgers back into multiple games. And so I kind of felt like with the bullpen, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? Like, is it as vaunted as maybe people are saying? Perhaps not. But again, so for me, the biggest change in my perception with the two teams fell pretty much with the Braves lineup being more potent and, capable of doing a lot more damage than I maybe sort of thought.
Yeah, I was just looking up, by the way, this is interesting to me. The Braves are the World Series favorite, plus 310. Dodgers are second in all of Major League Baseball at plus 400. And the next after that is the Astros at plus 700. So they've got the Braves and Dodgers grouped pretty tightly there, and then a big gap afterwards. Here's my thing, and if you follow me on Twitter, none of what I'm about to say is going to be a surprise to you because I've kind of been going off on this for the last 24 hours or so. To me, it's kind of wild to think that your perception of the Dodgers, at least the Dodgers, if you're Matt, like what you're saying, hey, I don't follow the Braves super closely. This is the most closely I've seen them play. Holy crap. They've got 6 or 7 dudes in their lineup that are nasty, and they pull out a couple guys with the bullpen that look really good. And it's not so much that your perception changed as much as maybe it just was as enlightened. like we got to see more. Because I would say I'm mostly in the same boat. I don't watch a ton of sort of random baseball games because the Dodgers play most of those nights, if not all of those nights. So we're pretty focused on what's going on here. But the idea that the Braves, that your view of the Dodgers would change, or that the gap between these two teams would change, to me is wild. And it's because of, like, again, I want to push back on Blake's suggestion that these games weren't competitive. Let me do a rundown here, and Blake, I'll give you a chance to respond to all of this, I promise. But I would say that these two teams battled pretty evenly in 3 out of the 4 games. It's worth pointing out these teams have played 7 times. The Braves won 4, the Dodgers won 3. That's literally as close as it could be, considering you can't tie in baseball. But Thursday night, the Dodgers lose 8-7. They go down 7-1 in the 5th inning. They battle back to 8-7. They had the tying run on second base with 1 out in the bottom of the 8th and the bottom of the 9th. They lose by 1 run. They had more base runners than the Braves. They had more home runs than the Braves, and they lost that game. Okay, Friday night is the one that wasn't close. The scoreline will tell you it was 6-3. Anybody will tell you it was not that close. It was 6-0 in the 8th. The Dodgers pulled all of their best players, gave up 1 million home runs. Urias got shelled. You are not going to hear me sugarcoat Friday night's game, okay? I want to be clear about that. Saturday night is the one that drives me crazy, and I'm not talking about the reaction to it, just the game. The Dodgers lose this one in extra innings. Let me repeat, in extra innings. That means these teams were tied. This game was competitive. Again, the Dodgers had more base runners, but they went 1 for 10 with runners in scoring position and lost in the 10th inning. The Dodgers had retired 18 consecutive Braves in a row before Vesia gave up a walk and a home run in the 10th. How about this? Bryce Elder allowed 10 hard hit balls and 4 walks in 6 innings and gave up 1 earned run. I don't know how that's possible. How you give up 10 hard hit balls and 4 walks. Insane to me. The Dodgers lose an extra. And then in Sunday, the Dodgers win a close one. Again, 15 base runners for the Dodgers, just 7 for Atlanta. The Dodgers go 2 for 10 with runners in scoring position. In the series, the Dodgers were 5 for 34 with runners in scoring position. If that number is like 7 for 34, we're probably talking about a 2-2 series. And I would even suggest if today they cash in more of those base runners, like if today was 5-1 or 6-1 or something, I wonder if people feel differently. And my whole point is it shouldn't matter. Like, these games were competitive. The Dodgers lost by 1 run. They got blown out. They lost in extra innings, a game they probably should have won. And then on Sunday, they actually do go out and win. My point of all this, Blake, is they lose 3-1 because it's a binary outcome, win or lose. There is no gray area in baseball, and that's fine. But when we're talking about a series that started on August 31st and continued into the beginning of September, I think you can look past just the scoreline and say these teams are a lot closer than maybe it appeared. And it's worth pointing out the Dodgers' best pitcher didn't pitch in this series. That's Clayton Kershaw. The Dodgers are far more injured with guys that are due back in the next couple of weeks. The Braves have literally nobody of value that is injured right now and did not appear in this series. So all of that to me says, sure, the Dodgers lost. I would have loved for them to win. I picked them to win 3 out of 4 in this series. But I don't think any differently about the Dodgers or Braves, Blake, just because of how closely I thought these 4 games actually were contested, with the exception of Friday.
Yeah, it's fair. To start with, your point about the Dodgers being second in World Series odds, I think that has a lot to do with how deep the AL is. There's like
Fair.
6 teams that could win the World Series, so every team there is just going to have lower odds to begin with, where in the NL, it's kind of the Braves and the Dodgers and then a bunch of wild card teams, basically. But then for the series, for me, it's more about a continuation of what the Braves have done all year. They've just been ahead of everyone all year. I don't really want to overreact to a 4-game sample size, but they've just been so good all year, and this just kind of continued what they were doing. Like, it wasn't something out of the ordinary for the Braves to do this to any team, and that's mainly where I'm coming from in my determination that they're just so much better. Like, their run differential between the Dodgers and the Braves is pretty close to what it is between the Padres and the Dodgers. Like, that's a
Which I want to
sizable
say
gap
is slightly misleading because the Padres have a very good run differential. The Padres, based on run differential, should be far better. So I know what you're doing when you quote that little stat there, Blake, and I just want to point that out real quickly.
It's fair, but it's also the truth. Like, the Braves are just outscoring every team they play by a lot all year, and it's a consistent trend. Like, we can say, yeah, the Dodgers had their chances, but at the end of the day, they didn't win the games.
Yep.
So, I mean, we can say, hey, maybe they're going to get those hits in the postseason, but we've also seen so often in the past that hitting with runners in scoring position is their biggest downfall in the postseason.
Yeah.
So like, I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to get those hits in the next series. So that's just where I'm kind of sitting at. Like, they were competitive to a sense, but also if you don't win, no one cares how competitive you were.
And Matt's going to get a chance to chime in here in just a second. I agree. Let me say this. The Braves, I think the Braves are better than the Dodgers. What I'm saying is that, to your point, these 4 games will have zero bearing on if these teams meet in the NLCS and end up playing. Like, nobody's going to look back on these games and say, well, the Dodgers won or lost because of this. What I'm saying is, if you were trying to look at these games for something that would help you predict how the postseason results would play out, I would suggest that getting 34 at-bats with runners in scoring position in 4 games is probably a more sustainable thing, the type of thing that you could project out and say, over time, that sort of performance is going to even out in the Dodgers' favor. Again, I'm not saying the Dodgers are better than the Braves. I'm mostly pushing back against the notion that, oh my gosh, the Braves won 3 out of 4. The series wasn't even close. And the Dodgers are like, there's a massive gap between the Braves and Dodgers. I think the Braves are better. I just don't, I would say the gap between the Braves and Dodgers is smaller than the gap between the Dodgers and whoever's in third would be my argument. Matt, what are your thoughts on what you make? Like, would you describe this series as competitive, even if the final win total maybe would suggest otherwise?
I mean, I guess semi-competitive. I don't know. Like, it's hard. It's hard to say for sure because I think if something's competitive can be interpreted by different people, right? Like, I could say, yeah, it was competitive, but the Dodgers were in it maybe 20%. If you tell somebody it was competitive, they might think, well, wait a minute, they should have lost, by 1 run each night type thing.
Yeah.
I think for me, and when we sat on our last live show and we were predicting, kind of series, this series specifically, you and I both agreed that the Dodgers would win 3 of 4. And I said, but my biggest thing is, I wasn't going to really hold on to the results too much, so long as it wasn't like lopsided by any means.
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying in terms of there was some level of competitiveness, especially when you look at the final score, when you look at the Dodgers coming back. But I think for me at least, there's reason to be concerned with the Braves jumping out to such a huge lead, like almost right off the bat. Like, that's troublesome and that's worrisome. If it had been, 2-0 after the second inning, and then maybe it's 4-1, and then the Braves kind of pull away, like, okay, fine. Like, but the way they took their big leads in the first 2 games is, and against the 2 pitchers that it happened against, I think is cause for concern. And then, then when you look at the Dodgers comeback, especially the series opener, like, yes, that was crazy. I honestly thought they were going to end up stealing that game because I believe in momentum and stuff like that. And of course, that this isn't the game I should be propping up and saying momentum is real. But even, Mookie's 2 home runs, like he hit the one to right field, Ronald Acuna almost had it. Like, they were basically both wall scrapers, right? So it's like, yes, the Dodgers came back, but Mookie's 2 home runs very easily could have been out. Not very easily. Potentially could have been outs, and it wouldn't have been that big of a stretch. And then what? Like, that game all of a sudden looks a lot different. So sure, it was competitive to an extent, I guess. For me, my biggest concern is how the Braves just basically jumped on the Dodgers quickly in both games, the first 2 games.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out also, just so that I can be unbiased here, Mookie Betts probably should have struck out on one of those 2 home runs. There was a check swing that maybe should have been called a strike 3. That wasn't, and then he gets to stay alive and hits the home run. You could also point to the strikeout with the bases loaded, I believe was today. That was atrocious. So, I mean, it probably goes both ways a little bit there. But the what you pointed out, what's interesting about the Dodgers is, like, you could point to 2 specific individuals that cost them this series. It was Julio Urias and Lance Lynn. Like, other than those 2 people, I don't think any of us could name a single Dodger who looked terrible this weekend. Like, go ahead.
Freddie Freeman, maybe a little bit. I think he went hitless, and I don't know how many hits he ended up having, but it wasn't his best showing by any means.
Fair. And I mean, I guess I'll caveat that with that we would have concern about. Like, I don't think anybody's concerned about Freddie Freeman. Yeah. Like, if we projected this out and said, okay, they're going to play this whole thing over again, we would say, holy crap, what are they going to do about Lance and, Julio? But we're not going to be like, oh man, I hope Freddie Freeman figures out how to hit against Max Fried or something like that. So I think in some ways that makes me almost feel better, because if you just can substitute out those guys or get slight improvement from those 2 guys, everybody else looked all right. But yeah, and I mean, again, I want to be clear. Like, I actually think, yeah, sorry, Vesia was the other one. Fair enough. Vesia belongs on that list as well. We're going to get to him later. I just think I want to just reiterate. I'm not saying the Dodgers are better than the Braves. I don't want us to overreact to 3 wins and 1 loss without looking under the hood a little bit, right? Like, this is a car that on the outside looks like a beater, but you open up the hood, you say, hey, you know what? The engine's pretty young and the transmission works pretty well. It's just a little cosmetic stuff here and there. And this whole series could have been completely different. And obviously, to Blake's point, it wasn't. I'm just saying, if you're projecting out into the future, I think there are reasons for Dodger fans to be optimistic if these two teams play again, because, you know, they got to the pitchers to some degree. Like, none of the Bryce Elder had 1 earned run, but again, like, I'd love to face him tomorrow. Like, 10 hard hit balls and 4 walks. Like, I'll sign up to face that guy again. They got to Strider before he got out of the game. So Fried being the one exception of guys that they didn't get to. But I just think the things the Dodgers did, they got on base at a really consistent rate. They just didn't cash it in. They put themselves in position to win. They fought back against a bullpen that was supposed to be one of the best and is one of the best in baseball. They claw back against the bullpen and against Spencer Strider on Thursday night. I just think there's a lot of positives to take from this series. So, Blake, I'll give you one last chance to add anything you want to on this one, and then Matt as well before we move on. But I want to clarify and confirm one more time. I'm saying the Braves are better than the Dodgers. I just don't think there's a huge gap between the two.
I think my main concern moving forward would be the Braves score most of their runs by hitting the homer, which tends to play up in the postseason because it's hard to get rallies when you're facing top starting pitchers. Well, the Dodgers kind of have to rely on those 3 or 4 hit rallies more often than not. They're still good at hitting homers, but the Braves are just completely ahead of them in that category.
Yeah.
So when you're facing frontline starters and the best relievers every night, it's really hard to get 6 hits in a row to have a rally where you score 2 or 3 runs. Where the Braves, you can get a walk and then a homer and you got 2 runs right there. And that's pretty common. Teams that hit a lot of homers tend to do well in the postseason. So I think that's just my main concern. That's been kind of a downfall of the Dodgers. We've seen just hitting with runners in scoring position, and it's kind of what we saw there again. And I'm not sure it's going to be the same problem again this year, but it seems what it's trending towards. So we'll see. I also think it's fair to point out they didn't have JD Martinez. I'm not sure how much of an impact he would have made there, but it's fair to point out that he is one of their better hitters and they didn't have him.
Yeah. Matt, it's ironic to be sitting here and talking about the Dodgers not having enough home run power, because I feel like I've been on these shows where it's like all they do is swing for the fences and hit home runs and strike out. And that's been the critique. Obviously, the Braves are like a souped up version of the team that hits home runs. They're like breaking records for how many home runs they hit. And to be clear, Blake, I agree with you. I do think that the ability to hit a home run rather than try and string 2 or 3 hits together is an advantage. And again, you know, the Dodgers kind of hung with them in the home run category in a couple of these games. And in, you know, but the one they got blew out of, it was like 4-0 for the Braves. So Matt, I like the question that Blake was kind of answering there. As you come out of this, what would you say is your biggest concern if the Dodgers and Braves were to meet again in 45 days or so?
Honestly, I think it's whether or not the Dodgers can trust their pitcher, their starters who are supposed to be kind of front end rotation guys. Obviously, Julio is projected, I think, by majority of us, even with his struggles, to start game 1 or 2 of any sort of playoff series if you're able to line things up the way you want.
Yeah.
And, you know, you made valid points of, hey, like look under the hood, look at some of the nuance. Like that absolutely makes sense. And I agree with you with a lot of that. But I think, kind of playing devil's advocate, though, that could also go both ways. Where if you look at, okay, if that's the case, then like look at Lance Lynn's season, right? Like, yes, he's turned it around since he's come to the Dodgers, but if you expand it a little bit more, it's not as pretty. Julio he got better and then has regressed again. And so his season has been a mess, right? So it's like, at what point do you kind of stop saying, if you look at the entire picture, like for me at least, like there is still reason to be concerned. And I know that you are saying, you're not sitting here saying the Dodgers are the better team. But that's why, you know what, I circle back to, for me, the biggest thing, my biggest concern specifically, like I said, is the starting pitchers. Can you trust them to hold up against the Braves? And, you know, we didn't see Kershaw. As much as Kershaw has pitched well in big situations, like he also hasn't necessarily been healthy. And he also hasn't stretched past 5 innings yet. And I know that there was the Guardians ground crew had a big hand in one of those starts, but he still is sort of building up. And here we are in September. And yes, he has time to do it, but it would be nice if he had, maybe had an opportunity to get into the 6th inning at this point. But yeah, I mean, that's what, I circle back for me is there's not necessarily a whole lot to take like from the results of the series other than, I don't know if the Dodgers still need a lot of things, in my opinion, to kind of go their way to, I guess, upset a team like the Braves, who are now, as you alluded to earlier, the World Series favorites. And honestly, I'm not sure if the Dodgers will even end up in it. Not that they needed to, but I don't know if they'll end up catching them in the NL standings. I think you needed to probably split this 4-game series at worst.
Yeah.
And I mean, not to completely derail the conversation, I know you guys will touch on it later, but like even Mookie's MVP odds, like I think they've taken a considerable hit as well.
Yeah. No. And I agree with you on pitching. I think Dodgers figuring out who their 3 or 4 man, it would be a 4-man rotation in the NLCS, who those 4 guys are, I think is the biggest question. And that's what, Blake and I are going to talk about here in just a moment, because Matt's got to hop off, is what do we make of Lance Lynn and Julio Urias, 2 guys who had 4 good starts in a row, followed by 2 really bad starts now in a row. And then you've got Bobby Miller, who had 2 bad starts in a row and then puts together a good one. You've got Emmett Sheehan, who looked amazing, Ryan Pepio, who's put together a few good outings, Ryan Yarbrough. Like, it's an interesting thing because, as bad as Julio and Lance Lynn were, you could say, holy crap, like how good Bobby Miller and Emmett Sheehan looked in this series is almost reason for optimism as much as there are reasons for pessimism. So it's something to keep an eye on. But I think ultimately starting pitching, which again is why we're going to spend the next 25 minutes talking about it, is the storyline. Because to Blake's point, the Braves hit all these home runs. The gap in runs scored between the Braves and Dodgers is like barely any. It's like 25 runs scored in the entire season. So the Dodgers offense has produced at a level that's on par with or close to on par with the Braves. We're going to talk bullpen later. The Dodgers since July 1st have the best bullpen in baseball. So I think the question is going to be starting pitching. Now, Blake would tell you he doesn't think Spencer Strider is an ace. That was the fun part of our Thursday night show, saying he thinks he's a number 2, which I loved. Bryce Elder is probably like their, Charlie Morton. Like those guys are, Charlie Morton's been really good lately. Bryce Elder on the season's been okay, but like those aren't guys that scare me. Strider and Fried probably scare me a little bit. I think Clayton Kershaw should scare them. And then from there, it's sort of a grab bag where you like their options a little bit better, but it's not night and day. This isn't the Phillies back in the day when it was like Cole Hamels, Cliff Lee, and Roy Halladay coming at you in games 1, 2, and 3, which that never worked out for them anyways. But anyways, I think I'm with you, Matt. And it's why part of what makes this so fun is there are no answers to any of these questions because we've got to wait. I think Fabian Ardaya had a piece where he pointed out it's 34 days until the NLDS starts. And then the Dodgers would have to get through that. They have like a 100%, 99.6% chance of getting the number 2 seed. So they get through that. Then they would potentially face the Braves. And again, potentially face the Braves. A lot would, the Braves still have to win some series, that kind of thing. And then we would figure it all out. So it's a lot of fun to talk about. And we're all sitting here hoping that we get a chance to talk about it for real in 45 days. Although I might be rooting for the Braves to lose before then. So maybe I'm not hoping for a chance to talk about it. But Matt's going to sign off. So Matt, thanks for joining us to talk Braves with us. We appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your night. You can check out all Matt's stuff on DodgerBlue.com as always. So Matt, enjoy the rest of your night.
Yeah, I'll see you guys. Have a good show.
All right. Blake and I are going to transition here. We're going to talk some starting pitching. And this is a little bit of a kind of a rapid fire sort of a deal. I want to just knock out a bunch of guys we've already talked about, but maybe dive in a little bit deeper. Let's start with, it's Sunday night. We're doing this show. We've got to talk Bobby Miller at first. 7 innings pitched, first time in his career. He pitches a full 7 innings. At one point tonight, Blake, he had retired 16 guys in a row before Matt Olson gives up the home run. He does end up getting out of that inning. He has 16 whiffs on 50 swings tonight. I loved that he got 6 whiffs on the fastball, 5 on the changeup, and 5 on the curve, splitting them up across his pitches. I love to see that. But what's interesting about Miller, and it seems like this is easy to forget maybe, he had allowed 4 earned runs in both of the starts prior to this one. So I know everybody's ready to pencil this guy in to the game 2 starter behind Clayton Kershaw. I'll ask you, Blake, did you see enough today to cleanse the taste out of your mouth from the 8 earned runs he had given up in the 9 or 10 innings in his last 2 starts?
Yeah, I think so. It was probably easily the best start of his career, and it came against a lineup we were just praising for basically a half hour.
Yeah.
So that's really encouraging. I mean, I think with rookies, you're always going to have the ups and downs. So I'm not putting like too much stock into his poor outings. We know he has the stuff and the ability to succeed, and he just really has to put it all together and be consistent. And when he does, he can be one of the best pitchers on the staff, if not the best. So, I mean, I would pencil him into a rotation spot. Dave Roberts said they're considering it, which seems like a nice way of saying, yeah, he's in and locked into a spot. But yeah, I mean, he's fun to watch when he's on, when everything's clicking. He's tough to hit. We saw it early when he came up, and then he kind of struggled a bit. They kind of figured him out. It was up to him to make the adjustments, and looks like he did it.
Yeah. What's so fascinating about Miller? So I mentioned he had retired 16 straight, and then Matt Wilson comes up and he leaves a hanging change that gets destroyed. And, people will tell you that's the difference between being at the major league level and anywhere else. Like Bobby Miller made a very small handful of mistakes today, but one of them got absolutely obliterated by Matt Olson. What I loved was it's a 6 2/3. He's in the 7th. He's up around 80 pitches. The pitch right before that, Blake, was a 99-mile-an-hour fastball that was absolutely freaking dotted on the bottom corner of the zone. Like, it was the first pitch of the at-bat, and I was like, holy crap. In the 7th inning, this guy is throwing 99 and freaking dotting it. The problem is the next pitch he makes is a changeup, and it gets blasted. He gives up a walk. We can talk about how the Dodgers had nobody warming up in the 7th inning of what was now a one-run game, beside the point because Bobby Miller gets out of it. But I'm with you. I was severely impressed. I think even if you go back to those 4 earned run outings, again, it's like he's making a small number of mistakes. So you've just got to keep shrinking those. The number of quality pitches he's making continues to improve and increase. He looks the part. He physically doesn't look like a guy I'm worried about wearing down over the next 45 days. The Dodgers intentionally held him back at the beginning of the season. So we're going to talk pitching playoff rotation in a little bit. So I want to table the give me your 4 starting pitchers in the playoffs for now. But I agree with you. Bobby Miller, as bad as the last 2 starts looked in the box score, I think this one absolutely was a palate cleanser and something that hopefully we see him build off of in the month or so ahead. Let's go to a couple guys, though, that struggled, who, again, we've already mentioned. Julio Urias, 11 earned runs in his last 11 innings pitch over 2 starts, which is a departure. The first 4 starts of August, Blake, I was saying he was back. 25 innings, 27 strikeouts, just 4 earned runs, 2 walks, and 16 hits. So he was allowing less than a base runner an inning, striking out more than a base runner an inning, and he has an ERA of like 1 over that stretch. And then the last 2 starts, he gets absolutely shelled. What the heck happened to Julio Urias the last week or so?
Yeah, so I was at that game covering it, and when we asked Dave Roberts about it, his answer was basically, I don't know what's going on. And I'm in the same boat there. I don't think anyone really knows what's going on. Julio's velo is down, and he was asked about that, and he said it's not a problem. There's nothing wrong. Dave Roberts said there's nothing physically wrong with him. But the velo's down. He doesn't think it's affecting his other pitches, which I think just logically it's going to affect his other pitches. Yeah. If you're not throwing 94 and you're now sitting 91, 92, hitters are going to be able to jump on that more often. You have less separation between the slider and the changeup and everything else.
Yeah.
It's confusing because it's like he's basically just fallen off a cliff this year from where he was last year. And then it was encouraging. He started to get back on track, and then just the same thing happened again. It's just, I don't know what's going on with him. I don't think they know what's going on with him. It's just very confusing.
Do you have any optimism that 4-start sort of sample that we saw at the beginning of August is something that he can tap back into? Like, do you have any sort of hope that a month from now we'll be sitting here not dreading the fact that Julio is going to be starting a big playoff game for the Dodgers?
I want to, because logically, I just don't see how a player in their prime years just falls off like that. They lose velo, they lose effectiveness in all their pitches, and they just don't know what's happening or going on. So I want to say yes, but at the same time, if they don't know what's going on, it's how do they address that? Yeah. Julio said he's going to watch tape and try and make adjustments between his starts, and that was basically all he said about it. But what is there to make the adjustments on? You've been trying to do that all year, and you still haven't really found it consistently. Yeah. So it's just really confusing. I don't know what else to say about it besides that. I don't know.
I'm with you. Well, let's go to one confusing guy to maybe somebody who's a little bit less confusing. Lance Lynn, Not the same numbers from Julio Urias. Not a typo there. 10 earned runs in his last 10 and a third for Lance Lynn. That's over 2 starts. And again, him and Julio, it's like a mirror. It's very bizarre. His first 4 starts with the Dodgers, 25 innings pitched, 4 earned runs. Those are the exact same numbers of Julio's 4-game success stretch, by the way. 25 strikeouts and 22 base runners. So again, strikeout an inning, less than a base runner an inning, just 4 earned runs in 25 innings. Since then, 10 and a third, 10 earned runs, 5 homers, 20 base runners, and 2 walks. 2 strikeouts, which I've said multiple times was the most concerning number of the bunch. And that's why, for me, I have way more confidence in Julio Urias moving forward than I do in Lance Lynn, simply because if Lance Lynn loses the ability to strike anybody out, like all of the rest of it was already a mess, giving up home runs, that kind of thing. If he's not striking anybody out, he really doesn't have anything to lean on.
Yeah, I mean, we addressed it in one of the last videos we did. His lack of strikeouts was the biggest concern for both of us, and they just kind of disappeared randomly as well. I was speculating maybe they were trying to tweak something to get him ready for the postseason or something like that, but I think it's just a case of where he's just kind of an average pitcher now, and he's going to show flashes of talent sometimes, and then sometimes he's going to get roughed up. He faced the best lineup in baseball, and he's not a great matchup for that for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
But I think that's just kind of what he is, like an innings-eating kind of mid-rotation guy who you're going to get some good starts from and some bad starts from.
Yeah, I do think it's worth pointing out. And look, if you're giving up home runs, that's a bad thing against anybody. Against the Braves, who are historically one of the best, if not the best, home run hitting teams like ever, Lance Lynn against the Braves is pretty much a disaster, which is a big deal considering the Braves are likely who you'd have to go through to get to the World Series. But I think you can kind of say, well, yeah, we knew it was going to be real ugly against the Braves. The Dodgers kind of made him wear it a little bit because it felt like they thought the game was out of reach, and then turns out it wasn't out of reach. But I think Julio is the far more concerning one, because I think Lynn, I could have sat here and predicted it wasn't going to go awesome. If you watched our series preview, I told you to bet the under on Lance Lynn strikeouts. It was plus money under 5.5, and that cashed like the easiest cash bet you'll ever make. So I think that one was more predictable. Julio, on the other hand, I went through all the metrics. Like, he was way better at home. He was way better in night games, and by a large margin, like a 3 ERA guy at home and at night games. And then for him to get shelled in kind of what was sort of his safe spot in many ways is a lot more concerning to me than Lance Lynn, who maybe I could have predicted that. And to the point of many people in the chat, none of us were really expecting Lance Lynn to maintain the unbelievable performance he had. I said when they got him, 6 innings, 4 earned runs, like he'll take it every day because he's just going to get you to the bullpen. It's been worse than that. The last 2 starts has been the problem. Let's shift though, Blake, and let's start talking some positive things. Let's start with an injured guy, and then we'll get to the young ones. Walker Buehler. Have you heard of him before, Blake? We're talking about all the Dodgers pitching needs. They have this guy, Walker Buehler. He used to be very good, has not pitched in over a year. He pitched today at AAA, made a rehab appearance. And safe to say, Blake, it went well. 2 innings, perfect innings with 2 strikeouts. The fastball touched 96.1 miles an hour, which matters for this reason. That's higher than his fastball average velocity in 2021 and 2022. They've tweaked his mechanics a little bit. If you watch the video, his what am I trying to say? His mechanics are very different. I'm blanking on the phrase I was trying to use there, but a lot of encouraging stuff out of Walker Buehler. So what do you make? I mean, he threw like 24 pitches, 2 innings, his first rehab appearance, 34 days away from the NLDS. Give me your Walker Buehler thoughts.
It was encouraging. There's still a long way to go. We've seen so often the Dodgers are counting on pitchers to come back and it doesn't work out. You can probably name like 10 guys off the top of your head in the last few years where that's happened to them, and probably even just this year alone. So it's encouraging, and I'm hopeful that he comes back, but let's see how he keeps doing down the line, especially when they start to stretch him out a little more.
Yeah, I mean, what would your guess be at this point? Like, by the time the NLDS rolls around, are we looking at a guy who's topping out at like 50 or 60 pitches?
It's so hard to say with the second Tommy John. I'm not like an expert on that by any means. I would be hopeful they can get him through like 4 inning, 5 inning kind of guy, and then go with maybe Ryan Yarbrough following him, and that'll give you 7 or 8 innings in a playoff game. So I guess that's my hope, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of do the math. Usually, like when guys are getting built up, it feels like it's an inning per week is kind of the rough, and maybe it's an inning per start, which is 5 days instead of 7 days. But you do the math. I mean, if he makes 2 or 3 more rehab appearances, you're hopeful that he ends that at 4 innings, and that would be 2-ish weeks. So middle of September, maybe he's up to 4-ish innings would kind of be if everything goes according to plan. But again, first appearance from Walker Buehler today. Hard not to be encouraged. Speaking of encouraging, let's talk about a couple youngsters we saw lately. Emmett Sheehan, in his appearance the other night, a 45% whiff rate, which is ridiculous. That was 18 whiffs on 40 swings, 4 innings, 3 hits, 1 earned, 3 walks, 6 strikeouts, just 1 hard hit ball. Although, Blake, do you think that hard hit ball that he gave up to Acuna, which was the hardest hit ball that StatCast has ever tracked in the last 8 years, should that count as 2? What do you think?
Maybe. Sheehan said it sounded like a jet engine after it was hit, and Dave Roberts said, I didn't know it was possible to hit a ball that hard. So that should tell you a lot about how hard that ball was hit.
Yeah. But I mean, what do you make of Sheehan? This is a guy that a lot of people have liked for a long time. I shouldn't say for a long time. For the past, since he's come up this year, a lot of people have been really positively encouraged. He gets sent down in part because I think somebody was tweeting me about it, and I went and looked. He's thrown like 63 total innings of professional baseball coming into this season, which is basically the number he's already at. So you have to keep in mind that developmentally he was behind Bobby Miller and Gavin Stone as far as in the Dodgers minor league pecking order. So that's worth pointing out as to why maybe he's been kept away from the major league team for the last month or so. But I mean, to do this against the Braves, again, 18 whiffs on 40 swings. I'm not saying you're going to get that every time, but only 1 hard hit ball. He did have 3 walks. I think, like I was trying to say, as much negative as there was around Lance Lynn and Julio Urias, there was a lot of positive with guys like Emmett Sheehan.
Yeah, it was really encouraging. For anyone wondering, about a 30% whiff rate is considered elite. So to be at 45%, it's just like incredible. And It was great to see it his first start back with the team against a great lineup. It was basically everything the Dodgers wanted from him, if not more. And there's not enough things you can say about Sheehan on a positive side. And he's also a really easy guy to root for. He's one of the nicest people in the clubhouse, and
love that.
I like rooting for those kind of guys. So, I mean, I hope he earns a spot in the playoff rotation. I'm not sure it's going to happen, but he might be one of their best options for it.
Yeah, and one of the reasons it might not happen is because this last guy that I want to talk about here, and that's Ryan Pepiot. I've said it a bunch before. Keep in mind that he was ahead of every young pitcher on the Dodger depth chart coming into the season before he got injured. He was the first guy that got called up last year ahead of Michael Grove. So he has been a guy the Dodgers have believed in for a long time. He had the prospect pedigree, et cetera, but injuries had kept him out. Since coming back at the major league level, he's made 3 appearances, 14 innings, 2 earned runs, 2 walks, and 14 strikeouts from Ryan Pepiot. Just 8 hits allowed. You mentioned a 30% whiff rate is really good. He's at basically 31% whiff rate across that stretch. I tried to look into, have they changed anything, tweaked anything? He's throwing more changeups and less sliders this year, which maybe shouldn't be surprising because his changeup is, many people were saying, one of the best changeups in all of professional baseball prior to even being at the major league level. He's throwing about 5% more changeups and 5% less sliders. I don't pay a ton of attention to vertical movement, but these numbers jumped out at me. The changeup has added about 3.5 inches of vertical movement, and the slider has lost about 4.5 inches of vertical movement. So again, you're just talking about pitches that are going in different directions, adding differentiation, and seemingly with the slider giving him far more control over the pitch. So give me what you've seen from Ryan Pepiot and how translatable this performance might be moving forward.
So I believe the tweak Pepiot made with his slider and changeup is he's using the slider to righties more and the changeup to lefties more, which is what he wasn't doing previously. I think he mentioned that in his last interview. But it's been really encouraging. This is kind of what we were hoping to see from him. He was one of the top prospects last year in baseball and in the system, and it was a decent debut season for him. It wasn't amazing. Some of the underlying numbers weren't great. He was walking a lot of people, but just looking at this year, cutting down the walks, I think, has been the biggest thing for him. He's not dealing with as many runners on base. His stuff is playing up, and he's getting more strikeouts. It's just kind of the year 2 jump you want to see from a pitcher,
Yeah.
and it's been really encouraging. Like, it feels like they should just go with a rotation of all their rookies in the postseason because those are the ones we just keep talking about, the positive things about them. We have concerns about Julio, we have concerns about Lynn, but we're just been talking all positives about these pitchers, and Pepio just falls into that category too.
Okay, so let's do it. Let's talk playoff rotation. The one position there is no debate about is the number 1 starter on the Dodgers rotation, and that is Clayton Kershaw. His
I
numbers
thought
are
you were going to
ridiculous.
say Bobby.
No, I was not going to say Bobby, because if Clayton Kershaw qualified, he would be leading Major League Baseball in ERA yet again this year. He is a freaking unicorn, and we need to appreciate Clayton Kershaw at every single step of the way. He's ridiculous. So Clayton Kershaw, and I mean, he's even been better over the last however many starts. The guy's ridiculous. Okay, so Clayton Kershaw is your number 1 starter. I will hear no objections to that opinion. From there, you could tell me just about anything, and let's start with what we think will happen. I'm pretty confident Julio Urias is going to be the number 2 starter. Now, to your point, how this shakes out, lefty, righty, do they want to mix that up? Whatever. I think Julio Urias is going to be number 2 on the depth chart, whether or not he actually starts game 2. That's my prediction. That's my gut as we sit here on September 3rd. Do you agree with that, Blake?
I do, mainly because of the splits you mentioned earlier. He's been much better at home.
Yeah.
They might want to change that around in the NLCS if they don't have home field advantage, which they probably won't. You could push Julio back to the 3 spot, but for the NLDS, I think they're going to go with Julio for game 2.
Yeah, and the NLDS, it's worth pointing out, you only need 3 starters. So then, again, I'm not asking who you would put. We're going to get to that in a second. Prediction-wise, I've got Bobby Miller as the number 3 guy. As much as Lance Lynn is the vet and the proven guy and yada, 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 I just don't see how you're going to be able to justify putting him in a game as a starter ahead of Bobby Miller. That's my instinct. So do you agree, if you had to make a prediction, would it be Bobby Miller in the 3 spot and Lance Lynn on the outside looking in?
I do agree, but it also wouldn't shock me if they decide to put Bobby Miller in the bullpen for that series and start Lynn for the 3rd game, because if Lynn isn't starting, I don't think they're bringing him out of the bullpen, so he would just be left off the playoff roster for that round to begin with. So if they don't want to leave him off, he'd probably get the ball in the 3rd game. You get another high leverage option in the bullpen with Miller. I mean, you could run out your high leverage guys of Bobby Miller, Ryan Pepio, Emmett Sheehan, Evan Phillips, and Bruce Gratterall. And that's a really good combo. So, I mean, they could get creative with something like that, but I still think Bobby's going to earn that 3rd spot there in the rotation.
So then would you have Lance Lynn? Again, we're predicting what the Dodgers would do. Do you think Lance Lynn, if they make it to the NLCS, would be penciled in as the 4th starter?
Yes, probably. Although they could also go with a bullpen game there. So
yeah. Walker Buehler's development feels like the wild card there. If they feel confident that Buehler can give them 4 innings, I feel like he takes that 4th spot.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just depends on who their opponent is, probably. I think they might be more hesitant versus the Braves than if it's versus the Cubs or the Reds or something like that. There's just a lot of wild cards up in the air. Like, we could see Lynn get back on track for the next month and go back to the form he was when the Dodgers first acquired him, and then he's probably a lock for that spot. So it's hard to say with so many variables what they're thinking right now, but as of today, I'd probably say Lynn's the number 4.
Yeah, and to your point, I think if they play the Braves, it would be absolute insanity if Lance Lynn starts a game against the Braves. If somehow the Phillies make it into that round and Lance Lynn has steadied the ship a little bit, then I think you can maybe justify it a little bit more otherwise. But that's kind of where I land. Real quick in the chat, I see people saying Bobby Miller should be the number 1 starter. I just want to do some Clayton Kershaw stuff real quick because I don't think this is crazy. Like to say Kershaw is easily the number. Clayton Kershaw has a 2.48 ERA right now for what it's worth, which is, like I said, if he were qualified, would be the best ERA in Major League Baseball. Blake Snell currently leads at 2.5. Snell has thrown 155 innings. Clayton Kershaw has thrown 112. So Kershaw doesn't qualify. If he did, he would be leading Major League Baseball in ERA. In his last 6 starts, he has not allowed more than 1 earned run in any of those starts. All of those, he has allowed 4 runs, all solo home runs for what it's worth. In the month of August, he allowed 10 hits and 5 walks in 17 innings and just 4 earned runs. Again, if you keep going back, he has not allowed more than 2 earned runs in any start since coming back from the injured list. Well, I should say dating back before he went to the injured list. The month of June, he allowed 4 earned runs in 33 innings. He was out all of July. He's allowed 4 earned runs in 4 starts since then. This is not an anti-Bobby Miller thing, okay? This is Clayton Kershaw is absurd, and people need to appreciate it. Again, I also want to temper the Bobby Miller hype train just a tad, because we cannot forget that he gave up 4 earned runs in both of the starts prior to this one. Blake, do you disagree with anything that I'm saying right now? Because I feel like there are some folks that think I'm speaking lunacy.
No, I don't disagree. I mean, I think it's a lock. Kershaw's going to start game 1, just his status, and he's still really good.
Yeah.
I mean, Bobby Miller has the upside, and he can pitch like an ace, but like we said earlier, he's kind of inconsistent. With Kershaw, you get more of that guaranteed consistency. So it's going to be Kershaw game 1, and I don't think there's really any debate to that.
Okay, so now let's talk if Blake was in charge, and this is where I'm going to ask the chat to get involved. Give me your 1 through 4 starting pitchers, and if you want to do a piggyback with a slash in there, do that. But if Blake Williams was in charge and Andrew Friedman came to you, Dave Roberts came to you, they said, Blake, you look like a smart guy. You've got a CSUN bucket hat on. Give me the 4 guys you want us to write down. Let's assume it's the Braves and it's the NLCS and they need 4 starters. Who are you giving them?
I'm going Kershaw game 1 and then 3 bullpen games with however you want to do that. Like whether that's Bobby Miller and Ryan Yarbrough for your first game, Ryan Pepio and Emmett Sheehan for your second game. And then maybe Michael Grove kind of factors in there when he comes back in a week. They'd probably have to go with Sheehan in like the 3rd game or something. But like we've been talking about this whole game, it's the rookies who have been the ones impressing us the whole season. And the veterans have been the ones kind of letting us down, leaving question marks. So I'm going to rely on those rookies. That's kind of what they were talking about this year, like let the kids play. So just go with that strategy.
What do you think about Dong's selection here in the number 2 spot, Blake?
I mean, depends where it's from, but we'll see.
Kershaw, Chicken Parmesan, Urias, Miller, piggyback with Yarborough. So to be clear, you've got Kershaw 1, Miller 2, and then you're going Sheehan with a piggyback 3. And you didn't mention Bueller. Was that on accident or on purpose?
Bueller would probably be the 4th game if he's back. Just part of that whole bullpenning strategy, like Bueller and maybe Grove or Bueller and Yarborough, however they want to shake that out. But they have a lot of options where you're comfortable with them for like 4 innings, and then you might not want them going 5, 6, 7 innings. So like play to your strengths. Let the guys with plus stuff play. And yeah, I mean, it could be fun. It's kind of what the Andrew Friedman has wanted to do for a while with that kind of pitching staff, where you don't have a set starter, but you just you play the matchups, you play based on who's coming up each inning. And it would be a risky strategy, but I feel like it could work out. And you probably have to get creative to beat the Braves, as we were talking about earlier. Like the Braves are a better team, so see what you can do when you get creative.
And you didn't mention Urias in any of those piggyback scenarios either.
They do need another lefty in their bullpen.
Okay.
So that's another. Julio could follow Bueller even. Like a lot of Julio's struggles come in the first inning. I don't know if that's whether or not he struggles in the first inning because it's just the first inning and it's too early for him or something, or if it's just when he's fresh into a game. But I mean, they have a lot of options where you could mix and match going guys 4 innings, and then Evan Phillips, or 4 innings, Bruce Starr. So, I mean, I think that's their best strategy moving forward for the postseason.
Well, and Julio works perfectly as a piggyback because all the other guys are righties and they're all hard throwers, and he's not a soft tosser like Yarbrough is. But the beauty of a Bobby Miller, Ryan Yarbrough split is you get them to put their lineup out there that is best against righties. And then in the 5th or 6th inning, if Miller pitches well, you're going to Yarbrough, who A, is not going to be throwing 100 miles an hour like Bobby Miller was, and B, is a funky lefty. So they're either going to have to make a bunch of substitutions in the 5th or 6th inning or deal with some nasty splits. And you could do the same thing, whether it's Sheehan or Pepio, and then piggyback with Julio Urias. You could do the same thing. Walker Bueller and Julio Urias would be a hilarious piggyback because those are not the roles anybody imagined for those 2 guys a few months ago. But I kind of agree with you in the sense, with the exception of it's going to sound crazy. Like there's part of what I saw from Julio a week and a half ago that felt like he had found something. And with 34 days, it's like you said earlier, until it actually happens, I find it so hard to believe that he just fell off of a cliff. We've seen the postseason success. We've seen the moments where he's been good. And so maybe he's not I would put Kershaw in the 1 spot. I would put Bobby Miller in the 2 spot. Maybe it's with Yarbrough as a piggyback, but I'd probably go Julio in game 3 and then have the piggyback be, Emmett Sheehan or Ryan Pepio. Probably Emmett Sheehan in that spot, because if Buehler's not ready, then Pepio would probably be the next guy I trusted to start a game. And then maybe it's Buehler and Pepio. But I tend to agree with you. I just think it's fascinating what the Dodgers are going to do with their postseason rotation. And, maybe we're overreacting to one really good Emmett Sheehan. We didn't mention Gavin Stone's name, who pitched well last time he was up. And he followed Buehler today with, I think, 6 1-hit innings or something like that with 7 Ks. So that's another guy that could be in the mix. Let's talk briefly. We've got a handful of odds and ends, so we're going to try and power through some of this and get to a couple questions, but I do have to go here in a bit. I do want to talk bullpen real quick, and I'll just mention this maybe. The Dodgers are 3rd in wins above replacement as a bullpen in all of Major League Baseball for the entire season, which is kind of crazy. They're actually 8th in ERA. And that sounds, you might say 8th isn't very good. Well, if you had checked this stat like a month or 2 months or 3 months ago, they would have been in the mid to late 20s, probably. The Dodgers bullpen from July 1st on has a 2.5 ERA. That's best in baseball. That's 0.24 better than second place and 0.67 runs better than third. They're 2/3 of a run better than the 3rd best bullpen for the last 2+ months now, which is ridiculous stuff. And so the bullpen is settling. And yet, I think to the point that we just made, what I've been saying all along is that the bullpen is going to get better and better as some of these young guys stop starting games and start getting moved into the bullpen. And so, with the exception of lefties, lefty relievers is clear weakness for the Dodgers now. But I think as some of these young guys move to the bullpen, as Joe Kelly gets healthy, as we'll talk about in a little bit, Michael Grove gets healthy, I just think they're going to have some options. So I'll leave it there because we have a handful of things to get to, and then I want to get to questions. But I just want to point out the Dodgers bullpen has been very good. Let's get to some odds and ends, injury updates, and then questions. Mookie Betts, the player of the month. James Outman, the rookie of the month. Mookie Betts MVP odds, referenced this earlier, are back to plus money. I think Acuna's minus 200 now. Would you still be placing a wager on Mookie Betts, or do you think that this weekend series kind of tilted things in Acuna's favor?
I don't think Mookie ever really overtook him in like the rankings of what people are considering. Like Mookie's clearly has the better stats. He's been more valuable. I think that's a given, but Acuna has the narrative, and a lot of times that's just what you need to win. Like it feels like the scenario where R.A. Dickey won over Clayton Kershaw that one year because he had the narrative winning 20 games and just being the knuckleballer and being different. Yeah. So that's just kind of where I see it going. Like Mookie would have to blow Acuna away to win it, and I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Mookie's plus 140, Acuna's minus 210. I still think there's value because I think a bunch of people are going to get to the end of the year and they're going to look at wins above replacement and they're going to be like, holy crap, this guy's a full win, maybe more better than Acuna. Maybe that won't matter, but I think there's still value. I'm not saying he's going to win, but if you're giving me plus 140, I would at least consider it. Some injury updates. Yency Almonte, Dave Roberts says he's still sore, not on a mound yet. Really quick, I'm not expecting Yency back at any point this season based on that report and the depth of guys they have in the bullpen. Do you agree?
I think there is a chance he comes back. I'm not sure I'm ruling him out yet. We'll see.
Okay. Michael Grove through this week. They're hoping that he's back this weekend. Dave Roberts did say exclusively in a bullpen role. Is Michael Grove a guy that you think has a chance to get into that playoff bullpen?
He has an uphill battle, but I think we saw stuff plays up out of the bullpen, and there's a chance. It probably depends on the other guys, how they're doing and injuries and all that. But I mean, he fits into my bullpenning piggyback everyone rule.
Yeah, there you go. Joe Kelly threw a bullpen this weekend, is expected to throw again on Tuesday and then begin a rehab assignment. So some good news there. JD Martinez will begin a rehab assignment on Tuesday. He's also, like Grove, hopeful that he will be back against the Nationals this upcoming weekend. I'm curious for you on the JD Martinez front. Colton Wong or Michael Busch, who gets DF? Who gets? Well, I guess Wong would have to be DFA'd. Bush could just be optioned. Who do you think gets sent off the roster when JD Martinez comes back?
It's gonna be Bush, and I
Yeah.
bet money on that.
Yeah, so would I. I mean, again, one guy would have to leave the organization, the other wouldn't. Jimmy Nelson throwing well. We didn't even mention him. He's the guy that's going to solve all their bullpen problems, right, Blake?
Yeah, he's a Crimson Tide alumni, Jimmy Nelson, so I'm rooting for him. He's my guy. He's going to come back, and he's going to save the bullpen even more.
There you go. Tony Gonsolin, do we know how his surgery has gone so far, Blake?
Yeah, so he was scheduled to have it on Friday, and then I asked Dave Roberts if he had the surgery and if there was any update, and Dave Roberts said, I don't know. He probably had it, but I don't know. So then the next day I asked him again, was there any update on Tony? And he said, no, I haven't heard anything, which to me seemed weird that he didn't know the next day. Like, you figured he'd shoot Tony a text and say, like, hey, how are you doing? How'd it go? Or at least hear if he had the surgery. So that's all we know about it. There's no update.
Crazy stuff. My least favorite story of the weekend was the Dodgers presenting Ronald Acuna a base for his 60th stolen base, the first guy ever to be in the 30-60 club. I hate everything about this, Blake. Do you agree with me? I think this is so stupid.
I mean, I don't mind it. It's like, it's whatever to me. It was a nice gesture, and Acuna's had a really special year, and he's the first player to do it, so I didn't really care. But what I did think was funny is, like, the base is as big as Acuna, basically. Like, he should have 60 stolen bases with how big that base is, and that's to my point I made on the last time I was on the show. Like, it's not as special because they made stolen bases easier to get. So, I mean, take away what you want from that, but yeah.
Okay, last one, and I'm going to throw the questions up, so start throwing questions in the chat. What did you make of this Scott Boras, Cody Bellinger, Andrew Friedman back and forth? Boras basically accusing the Dodgers of misusing Cody Bellinger, not letting him get healthy, yada, 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 firing shots. And then Andrew Friedman basically saying, hey, why didn't Scott Boras say anything about the Performance Institute that he has and their role in it? And then Boras kind of backed off some things. I just thought it was interesting that Friedman and Boras, who, by the way, is the agent of Julio Urias, among other people who Friedman may have to negotiate with in the future, it seemed like it got kind of ugly there for a little bit.
I mean, I don't think they've ever really had a good relationship. The Dodgers are always looking for value, and
Sure.
Boras is always looking for the biggest contract, so they usually don't match up. Like, I think JD Martinez was their first Boras signing in a decade or something crazy like that. Like, they just don't deal with him. So, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. The most concerning thing is two other prospects signed with Boras in the last month, so I guess they're trade bait now, but one of them looks like an encouraging prospect. So, I mean, it's also just Boras trying to get his guy paid, and Bellinger's going to be a free agent again after the year. He's going to have to get him a nice contract. So I don't think either side is ever going to not do business with the other over it, just because they're both like in the same market. They want to get the most money and improve their teams the most, essentially. So I'm not taking away a ton from it, but it's just kind of a funny thing.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get to a few questions here. Michael wants to know who misses the playoff roster, Chris Taylor or Ahmed Rosario. Both these guys are going to be on the playoff roster. Basically, everybody that is currently on the major league roster, except for Colton Wong and Michael Bush, will be on the roster, with including JD Martinez. They only have one extra bat right now, so JD will replace one of those guys, and the other guy will get left off. I assume you agree with that, Blake.
Yeah.
David wants to know, who would you rather face in the playoffs, the Cubs or the Giants or the Phillies?
Either the Cubs or Giants. The Phillies, like, they haven't been great this year, but they're still, I feel like they're built for the postseason, and that's kind of what we saw last year. They have two good pitchers at the top and a strong lineup, so I would just want to stay away from them. So give me the Giants or the Cubs. I'm not too scared about either of those teams.
Yeah, give me the Cubs all day, every day. There's if we lose to the Giants in the postseason, it's the end of me. So
that's setting up for a Cody Bellinger hitting 400 with 5 homers in the NLDS.
Fine. That's fine. We're throwing 99-mile-an-hour fastballs right up above his swing pattern, and it's going to be 12 strikeouts for Cody Bellinger's in that series. That's my my guess. Okay, Dong's got a food question for you, Blake. Georgia peaches or nectarines, and should they be crisp and crunchy or soft and exploding with juice? This one's an easy one for me, but I'll let you go first.
I haven't had either of them, so
you're not a fruit. You never had peaches or nectarines?
I think I've had a peach before, but like no, I like apples the most. So
Okay, the answer is Georgia peaches and absolutely soft and exploding with juice. A peach is like maybe the most underrated fruit. You get a fresh peach, Blake, and it is top tier of all foods. That's amazing. Okay, Casey says, can we address Julio's complete nonchalance, his attitude on the mound, his performance the Friday was disheartening. He didn't look like he cared. None of it is funny. I don't know. I've never felt this way personally about Julio. I think he plays with an energy that when things are going well is a positive thing. And when things are not going well, he tends to wear that on his sleeve. I've never viewed it as nonchalance personally. What about you, Blake?
no, I haven't really either, and I think that's also what kind of helped him in the postseason. Like he keeps a pretty calm demeanor at all times, and he's not going to really show his emotions as much as someone like Lance Land when he's out there screaming and yelling when everything's going wrong. And like Julio's just been that kind of calm guy all the time. So when things were going well, he had the same kind of attitude I thought as when things were going bad.
Yeah. Hepatitis, see you later. Do the Dodgers have a championship pitching staff? Kershaw is not a playoff performer. Now he's our number one. Yikes. Look, I'm not worried about Kershaw in the postseason. You can give me every stat in the history of the world, and I'll tell you all the ways that those numbers are worse than they should be. My only counter, the answer is no, they don't have a championship pitching staff. But I don't think there's many teams out there that do, would be my counter. I don't think the Dodgers starting pitching is it is worse than many other teams. I don't think it is like head and shoulders worse than many of the teams that they might find themselves matched up against, would be my take. And I think their lineup and bullpen are potentially good enough to make up for it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I guess I'd point out like the Braves have had a championship caliber pitching staff every year for the last 5 years or something like that and haven't won a championship. While the Nationals had like two good pitchers in their World Series run and won. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, I laid out the formula for how they can win with their pitching staff, so they should just go with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Maybe one more question here. There was one about Bobby Miller. He has no chance at the Rookie of the Year, unfortunately. I say that as a guy who has a 30-1 Rookie of the Year ticket. It's probably about 1,000-1. Corbin Carroll has that thing about as locked up as it could possibly be. Let's see. There was one more question. Oh, here we go. This is one. What is the best way to help young pitchers succeed for the playoffs? I mean, this will be a new thing. The Dodgers have not been a team that has trusted young pitchers in the postseason, at least not that I can remember. So I think it's to some degree throw them out there and hope they float, right?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that bullpenning them is going to be the best way to help them succeed. You limit how much they're pitching in the postseason by giving them like 4 innings match each time out, and you kind of play to their strengths. And I think that's how they're going to have to do it. Just rely on the stuff they have. And yeah, I mean, you kind of don't know until it happens. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a good point that coming out of the bullpen might be to their advantage. So yeah. All right, folks. Well, hey, this week, Blake, 3 games against Miami after an off day tomorrow, and then 3 games in Washington. So they've got an East Coast swing, lots of early games. So be prepared for that. We are planning to do some post-game shows, but just stay tuned to my Twitter at Jeff Spiegel or the Dodger Blue 1958 Twitter for times on that, because a lot of those games are early. So sometimes we start the post-game shows right afterwards, but if it's like a 3:40 game, that might be tougher to do for a lot of people. So stay tuned for that. But thank you again to everybody for watching, joining us live. Again, our numbers have been great the last month or so. So thank you so much for spreading the word and inviting other people to join us. As always, if you're new, please subscribe and ring the notification bell here. If you're listening via podcast, or if you're a podcast person, go ahead, search DodgerHeads on Apple, Spotify, and Google. Give us a follow, a rating, and a review. We would greatly appreciate it. That is Blake Williams. My name is Jeff Spiegel. As always, folks, enjoy the rest of your night. And of course, go Dodgers.